Welcome to Smoke and Mirrors, the podcast that cuts through the noise of the many policies and regulations that affect American agriculture. Each week, we pull back the curtain on the programs, policies, and perceptions shaping the agricultural community in rural America. If you've ever felt like something doesn't add up, you're not alone. I'm Jenny, and this is Smoke and Mirrors. Let's make sense of the maze we call farm policy.
Welcome to Smoke and Mirrors, the podcast where we make sense of agricultural policy. I'm here today with Zach Ducheneaux, who's the former administrator of the USDA Farm Service Agency. He's currently working on his family's ranch at the Cheyenne River Sioux Reservation in South Dakota. Zach, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me, and work is a generous term for what I do. Many of my duties revolve around being a good lala for my grandson Butte.
We're here today to talk about the Grasslands CRP, Conservation Reserve Program. And this is something that I recently noticed that the Grassland CRP now makes up over a third of all acres in the Conservation Reserve Program, and that this has happened over the past 5 years. I am super excited to learn about how this happened, but first, let's go back to the beginning. The Conservation Reserve Program, in its modern form, started in 1985. It was a part of that farm bill right in the middle of the 1980s farm crisis. Anything else you think people should know about the program?
Well, I think we should take a look at what was happening during that farm crisis and think about other rational bases for changing the nature of production on land. We've gotten to the current conventional wisdom is that this is all about conservation and all about environmental benefits, but there is certainly a supply management aspect to this, in my opinion. And it leads us to the topic of conversation today is Grassland CRP, why Grassland CRP doesn't have that same impact. But I think that as we contemplate CRP and its trajectory since 1985, we should keep in mind the number of acres and understand the limits that exist to prevent CRP from actually competing with production agriculture, because that's a red herring at best that's used by folks that want to unwind the other impacts of the program, who think that the markets will fix everything.
If you look at it right now, 2/3 of all Conservation Reserve Program acres, approximately 2/3, would be in grasslands or continuous, which tells me that it's increasingly becoming a working lands program.
Yes, I think that the grasslands is a more targeted working lands program than the continuous. Some of the CRPs that we've done in the past are moving towards that working lands conservation, but generally it's in those aspects, and this is one of the things that I think we should be moving towards. Every acre of CRP should be working lands. There's no reason not to have livestock graze through there once a year. And man, that would solve a lot of the problems of today if we had a place for a few more head of livestock to be run affordably. We wouldn't.
So the Grasslands Conservation Reserve Programs was authorized first in the 2014 Farm Bill, is my understanding. Is that correct?
That sounds as correct as I could make it. I don't recall if this is one of the ones that maybe had a little pilot out there before, or was that the pilot?
There might have been an earlier version.
Yeah, might have been a pilot in a few states. But anyway, yeah, for all intents and purposes, as it is now, 2014, and then amended a little and
when I talk about policy, I usually use the word typically just in case there's some exception that I've left out. But it sounds like it really started taking off around, there was hardly any acres in the Grassland CRP until around 2019-20. And that's right when you started at FSA. Is that correct?
I started in February of 2021 at the FSA. And coming into the role, we had a different perspective on conservation and the CRP program and Grassland CRP than the previous administration. They had taken the step to set the minimum rental rate at, I think the lowest you could get was something like $2 an acre, which is almost nuisance money. So it's no wonder there was no one enrolling in the program. Came in, took a look at average rental rates across the country and set a nominal minimum rental of $15 an acre, which really helped people take a look at this as a viable alternative source of income to enhance their production. And I'll drive that point home all through this conversation. Grassland CRP is not only a conservation program, but it's a production enhancement program and a resilience program that can help mitigate the need for disaster programs when done right. So that setting that minimum rental rate at $15 an acre caused a lot of producers to sit up and take notice, and that helped them realize, man, the cost share benefits for the conservation measures that are part of my conservation plan are now affordable. Because prior, when you had let's just take land in South Dakota, I would guess that our land here that we get to operate, if it was enrolled in a CRP program for grasslands, would have been in that $2.5, maybe $3 an acre rental, which is better than a poke in the eye. With enrollment in Grassland CRP program, you have access to a pool of cost share capital that you can use to bring your grazing plan to bear. That's a 50% cost share as opposed to what you get at the NRCS, 75, sometimes up to 90% for socially disadvantaged producers. Having a higher rental rate made that 50% cost share look like something that's more achievable, because fundamental underpinning all of this is the fact that ag isn't financed in a way that lends itself to long-term generational planning, let alone beyond next year, typically for a cattle producer. So having the higher rental rate let producers take a more meaningful look at the cost share rates that are offered in Grassland CRP and see a path forward for them in their operation.
When you started at FSA, was expanding Grasslands CRP, was that a priority?
It was a priority of the department to expand Grassland CRP as a cattle rancher myself, former cattle rancher at the time, because one of the provisions of being a political appointee and being in production is you can't make policy around whatever it is you're producing. So when I found that out, I divested, and that was our generational transition, was a political appointment. I said, Kelsey, as of today, you own all the cows. Enjoy, have fun. Because I wanted to make some livestock policy. And I think we knocked it out of the park in that regard. But a priority of mine, I was first exposed to improved grazing practices clear back in the 90s. I went to a management school there in Kansas, the Graham School. And what is the old fella's name? It was Frank and Bill Graham, but then there was an old guy there that reminded me of Maurice Minifield from Northern Exposure, Gene Raymond. And they were talking about these ranches that they had worked with in New Mexico that had engaged in holistic management through the Savory Institute. I don't think it was an institute then. I think it was just holistic management, and how they had doubled, tripled, even quadrupled their stocking rate by doing thoughtful, focused grazing. So I've been aware of that since then and never had the means to implement it, but always believed in it because it makes such good sense. And then you can go out and see it in the environment. Because of that, I came in with the notion that what we do with all CRP land maybe could stand a little change, and aware of the fact that occasionally CRP land is used in disasters. So was really happy to see the focus on Grassland CRP, because I think there has been historically disparity in the federal farm program safety net planning side between the crop side and the livestock side. And this got livestock producers a little more fair shake. So I was really happy to see the administration and Secretary Vilsack push us in that direction. And I went all in on it and said, oh, yeah, let's do this.
So is it your explicit goal? Like, did you have a specific goal for expanding it, or was it just something that you wanted to move in a particular direction?
So remember, we have to work within the acre cap set by Congress. So we should discuss why there's an acre cap at all. I fundamentally don't understand, if you're doing working lands conservation programs, why you'd have an acre cap unless it's tied back to a short-sighted approach to spending versus investment. Because when you invest a conservation dollar, you have long-term societal benefits. But if you look at that as spending and limit it, you shorten up the growth curve of those societal benefits. There's I think it's a 25 million or 27 million acre cap right now.
I'm going to have to pull up my class notes.
Okay.
I think it was 35-40 at one point.
It was, yeah, way back in the old days. But We were working within, I think, a 27 million acre cap, or 26 and a half, if I recall. But anyway, around 25, 26 million acres were allowed to be enrolled. And as we do those programs, we've got enrollment periods, but we've also got continuous CRP. We're required by statute to have a general and a grasslands enrollment period. And continuous, just like it says, goes on and on throughout the year. So we have to take a look at the number of acres available, and that's a function of acres not enrolled and a function of acres rolling out of existing contracts. And then we allocate those sign-up periods amongst those. So we did grasslands first, which I think is the normal pattern, so that we could see how much we had enrolled in grasslands, how much we would accept based on the environmental benefit index, and then that would help us decide what we had left for regular general CRP.
So you chose to start with grasslands to see, you prioritized it through doing it first? Is that the correct?
I would say that the fact that grasslands happens first allows us to prioritize it. I don't.
Okay, that wasn't your choice. That was already in place.
I couldn't say that wasn't I couldn't say for sure that was a conscious decision by me or by the administration, or if that's just how it had been done. But we were able to leverage that chronology in a way that helped us maximize enrollment in grassland CRP.
Okay, that makes sense. I just pulled it up. It looks like the cap was at 27 million in 2023, and it looks like in 2025 we're approaching the cap, if it is still indeed 27
Yeah, we
million.
were right up against it in 24 when we were heading out the door.
All right. Yeah, and I'm just seeing here how from 2022 every year, not doubled, but I mean it every year. Just, I mean, yeah, it looks like in 21 was it really started taking off. Were these expiring acres? So you had land that was in general CRP and it was coming out, or was it new acres, or a combination of the two?
In the 2018 Farm Bill, which I think was passed in 2020, but no, 2018 was maybe on time.
2018 was 2018. It was
I'm thinking of the previous one. So there was an increasing number of acres. It started at 23, went to 24, 25, finally landed at that 26 number. And so there were 1 million new acres on the table every year, but then the expiring acres coming in on top of that was where we got the acres to allocate.
I guess going back, do you think the increase was like mostly new acres, mostly expiring, or more of just a combination of the two?
I don't know the breakdown of that.
Okay. What did you see? A lot of expiring acres going into it.
Let's talk about our definition here first. So are you talking about the actual acre of ground, and was it an expiring acre of ground that then rolled into grasslands? Or are you talking about acres within the cap and the allocation of those? Because those are two different conversations.
What I'm talking about is you see this, from 2022. I mean, you're adding like 1 million acres a year, like you said, and a lot of that's in grasslands. You see generals going down every year. Tenuous is pretty steady. Grassland is going up substantially. So those acres that are now in grasslands, I'm assuming some part of them had expired from the general, and some are new to the program.
So, yeah. I would say that some of the acres, the actual acre belonging to a producer coming out of the CRP program normal, does go into grassland CRP so that they can return it to a grazing practice. But that's a different conversation than talking about acres within the allocation. So some of them do. I don't know what the number is. I sure our highly skilled team tracks that. But we were looking at the acre numbers and not the trajectory of that acre in that particular local administrative area, or that county office or that state was kind of that team's duty to track. Yeah.
I would be really interested in seeing that. I might ask they're probably pretty busy right now, but somebody at NRCS or maybe even ERS. I know they were using the contract files.
Yeah. Thank God they're back to work. There is a monthly report of CRP that comes out. Have you seen that? Okay. Yeah. Gotcha. So they're gathering that. So within that, they should be able to make a determination on whether that particular acre is brand new to the program or a transition from general CRP.
And to see this type of change, I could imagine in the county FSA offices that staff had to be trained on this and aware of it, enthusiastic about helping producers either enroll new acres or transition existing ones to grasslands.
Yeah, but the pattern had already been there. I mean, we had some enrollment despite that unrealistically low rental rate payment. There was still some producers that did the math and had the resources to make the most of that 50% cost share and came in and did that. So it was existent in that regard. Would have been nice to be able to get some more staff members on to help with that workload that policy shift created. But again, it's still a acre-based program, and we didn't go above the cap. And typically our grassland chunks are in bigger chunks than the 20, 40, 65 acre continuous CRP. There may have been an economy of scale in it for staff in some of the counties as well.
Gotcha. Yeah, because it looks like, it maybe 1 million acres in 2021, and it doubled then, and you kept adding at least 1 million acres.
Yeah.
Every year.
And it's important to understand how we arrive at that number. So we open enrollment and anybody can apply. And then we use a ranking system based on the environmental benefit index to determine what threshold we will go down to and accept acres into the program. So we had a lot more demand than we enrolled for grassland CRP in every year that we were there. But we have to set the threshold somewhere. Otherwise, grassland would have taken all of the acres or an even greater share of the acres that are available for enrollment, which would have limited our ability to do a general CRP sign up and limited anybody's ability to get into continuous CRP.
So it takes quite a bit of management to manage the cap. I guess before we go much further, could you walk me through maybe one or two examples of what a grassland CRP contract would look like?
Sure. I'll use it. Let's take a hypothetical producer in Meade County, South Dakota, who's got 4,000 acres of grassland. Typically, they would operate under a set stocking rate. That whole 4,000 acres has a carrying capacity of, we'll be generous and we'll say 200 head, 200 animal units, cow-calf pairs per year. They could enroll that in a CRP grasslands program or grassland CRP program, receive $15 an acre for every acre enrolled, up to the payment limitation, which I think is $50,000 a year. And then part of that enrollment is getting into a conservation plan for which they could receive up to a 50% cost share on fencing, water development. A big deal up here is fabricated windbreaks to keep the cattle out of the low-lying areas and the bitter winter storms. Some seeding practices, any number of things. The producer would receive a 50% cost share on those practices and have them implemented under a timeline. The end result of that would be at the end of that grassland CRP contract, they would literally be able to run more cattle on their property, because conservation equals soil health equals productivity, and it's a continuing growth cycle. So that's one example. So for a $50,000 investment and some cost share dollars, we have created the ability of that producer, enhanced the ability of that producer to bring 200 cattle into the beef cattle complex over the next X number of years, but increase their ability to do that in a more thoughtful way that stockpiles more water, stockpiles more forage. So maybe actually save some money on the drought disaster programs for that producer as well, or NAP, because they're going to have better productivity, better resilience to the droughts that we might have to withstand, better resilience to the winter storms that they're going to have to withstand. So there's a long-term benefit to that initial investment in that producer that too often gets taken off the table when we're thinking about the allocation of federal resources through the Department of Agriculture, through the Farm Bill or other programs.
I want to try to understand the cost share. Would these be more one-off expenses? So you're putting in the fencing that's relatively one-off, with water, one-off. A windbreak, that would be more one-off. I could see seeding. Maybe it's not every year. So would these typically be things you need to do at the beginning?
It'd be a one-time in the contract deal, typically. Yeah.
And there's also a requirement for a conservation plan, I understand. And I'm curious to learn more about that and whether or not it has a stocking rate in that.
The conservation plan wouldn't generally have a stocking rate in it beyond what was already established there, if I recall correctly. I do know people that know a lot more about the nuts and bolts of this that can get you the right answer to that. If you're on school lands, for example, or if you're operating in Indian country where there are stocking rates that are set for people, you would have to adhere to local, tribal, or state law. The key indicator that federal conservation programs are going to be looking for in the implementation is ground cover. Are you leaving sufficient ground cover to preserve the investment in conservation? That's regardless of stock if there's no other restrictions on it, as I understand it.
Those two would be related and quite, integral in practice. So is a conservation plan, that's something you have to do up front when you sign the contract? And is there some annual follow-up on that?
There would be compliance checks to make sure you're abiding by the conservation plan. But yeah, it's an initial tool because it lays out the plan for the next Grasslands, I think, is a 10-year program. So it lays out the plan for the next 10 years. And if there are conservation practices planned, you might not need a cross fence until you get a water development in a particular pasture or a particular part of an existing pasture. So water development would come first. Then in the subsequent year, you do some fencing. The subsequent year, you're moving to the winter pastures. Now you're doing your fabricated windbreaks. So the conservation plan also lays out the implementation of those structural enhancements that you may be to improve your ability to produce.
Were there any hiccups in the rollout of this? Anything that you guys had to adjust or sort of typical problems people ran into?
Producers struggle to understand the environmental benefit index and why that excludes them. And it's complex and it is done generally at a national level. So you lose some of the relevance of the local one-off data. When you're doing anything at a macro level, micro things are going to be part of the average. So helping producers understand that is a key part of it. But otherwise, the program was very well received. We certainly didn't hear any complaints about the minimum rental rate.
Absolutely not.
And helping producers be more productive. One of the challenges that we did here is for some of the bigger operations out further west from here, where they've got 12, 14, 15,000 acres, the $50,000 payment limitation served as a limiter on their participation in the program. And they hadn't gained the sophistication of some of their farmland counterparts who know how to make the most of payment limitations amongst an entity. I see you smirk there. You see what I'm talking about. But I think it's important to pull on that thread just a little bit because I'm not bad-mouthing the producers that have that level of sophistication and are able to leverage that. I just wish that we gave everybody who is accessing federal resources the same credit for being resourceful and treat that like good business as well, instead of casting judgment on producers that may need to take advantage of loan servicing or maybe getting FSA direct financing as a refinance tool. That's a good business decision too, and we should give them as much credit as our savvy producers that are leveraging the farm programs to their benefit.
So I did not discover how much this had grown until a couple of weeks ago. So I had looked at the data up to 2022 and we said, okay, it looks like it's growing. And then I pulled up the most recent data from the FSA website that I added all the 2025 statistics to date. And I'm like, this is a really, really big deal. And I had a little bit of trouble finding information on this story. Was this a story that you were telling when you were at FSA? Is this something that kind of organically happened and then you realized it?
We, I thought, did a great job of publicizing this, and maybe we just didn't get our arms around our friends in the educational community, because had we not done a sufficient job of publishing it, we wouldn't have got the producers in the door.
You did the important part, for sure.
We should have done a better job of touting the success so that it resonated more broadly, so that we could leverage our land grant folks to help analyze that success and prove the value of it. So that's a shortcoming on our part, perhaps, but I can say this definitively. The blogs that I put out as your FSA administrator were taken off the first week. So there may have been a disconnect on the policy initiative that caused a removal of some of the literature or press that was offered by our administration. Rock on.
I mean, this isn't my primary area of research, but you know, I'm in the Flint Hills, which is a major grassland.
Yep.
I'm very familiar being in Kansas with, that our cattle herd is at its lowest levels. And
pretty close to we had some target areas too. So we were in Kansas where we've got the lesser prairie chicken target area where we were doing all our $5 added incentive payment for enrollment rental. So yeah, I mean, it's our fault if you didn't know, not yours. We should have made sure we're getting the information in front of you.
This is a big program change. It's a big shift in the conservation reserve program. So I think it's interesting for people to know, and I think it does shift the focus. Definitively shows that more of our federal dollars are going to working lands. And it looks like that's going to continue. I couldn't see anything different happening.
I'm unaware of where they're at with grassland enrollment or targets or anything like that right now. I know as we were planning for a prospective second term, we were taking a look at the contracts coming out in out years and making determinations about how we could slice the pie. I fundamentally believe that grassland acres shouldn't count against the acre cap because one of the rationales for the acre cap going from 30 or 40 million down to the 23 it was at the beginning of that particular farm bill was it was competing with young producers, beginning producers, competing with crop production. I bet the guys that have soybeans right now are wishing they could have got some land in CRP and had a little higher acre cap rate. So I think the balance there that we're trying to demonstrate is if you have the limitation on acres as part of a prevent competition, keep land productive, maintain commodity flows. But there are other limits that we should probably get on the table too, as long as we're visiting about it. There's the payment limitation that we talked about. I think it's $50,000 per entity and per producer, not per entity. And there's another limit within a state and within a county where it can't go beyond a percentage of acres within that particular county, with a couple of very narrow exceptions. And those are all put on to throttle the ability of this program to impact broader commodity markets. But they were put on and contemplated before we had a working lands conservation program. Many of those, I would guess, have their origins back in earlier CRP, and we talked about this just becoming a real program in 2014. So there's a policy disconnect there, and maybe we should re-examine that policy going forward and say, all of these acres in grassland CRP are just an investment in conservation benefits and an investment in production and an investment in resilience. Maybe there shouldn't be a limit on those.
And I would also add, I'm guessing most of the land that's in the grassland CRP is not suitable for crop production, at least in our modern economy. It'd be hard to get that EBI up, I'd imagine.
I would suggest that is probably accurate. However, I think a case could be made that if you're growing lettuce in Arizona, you're probably farming in acres that aren't suitable for farming. So I don't think the limitation on suitability for farming necessarily precludes someone from going out and farming.
Yeah, there's more to it than that. Absolutely.
But the CRP as well is we're not taking the best farmland out of production. Regular CRP, it's marginal and submarginal lands, and it gives producers an option to say, I'm going to focus my efforts on the really productive land, and I'm going to take this stuff in the riparian area out anyway and use it as a filter strip so that I can do better over here. So it's that this is competing with good farmland is a misconception. Is long-term participation in CRP competing with the ability to maintain a national cattle herd? Hell yeah. What we got in 2022? We had a drought, 2021 rather, we had a drought in North Dakota that spread all the way to eastern North Dakota, deep into Montana, south into northern South Dakota. Producers could then use CRP land. They have to enter in a relationship with whoever owns the CRP or hopefully have some of their own, they can use that for grazing to mitigate the impacts of the disaster. When the fires happened in the panhandle of Texas, we opened up CRP for grazing all the way up into Nebraska to help those folks keep their cattle herd together. If we had a policy system in place where we are continually using CRP acres to maintain cattle herds or emphasizing young and beginning producer activities there and not penalizing the CRP owner, maybe we forge that connection that we try to get with the transition incentive program. That's an aspect of CRP where a producer gets a couple extra years if they're working with a young beginning producer, but they're shooting at each other in the dark right now. There's no real coordination of demand with acres because we have to protect the privacy of individuals on each side of the transaction.
Is there anything else that we didn't cover on CRP in general or the Grasslands program you think's worth mentioning?
We didn't talk much about the conservation reserve enhancement programs, and there were some key changes made to that program in the 2018 Farm Bill that allowed them to be more broadly accessed. It allowed for a non-cash match, which is critical. That opened the door for us to do some meaningful work in getting the agreements with tribal nations in Indian country and try to drive higher levels of enrollment, because especially in the Grasslands CRP program, within Indian country, most of the land suitable for farming was homesteaded by non-Indians when the reservations got checkerboarded. Made some great strides in conservation reserve enhancement programs, and it was because the policies were changed in the Farm Bill to make it more accessible for folks.
Okay, so that's the conservation reserve enhancement. Is that a part of continuous? Or
yes,
how
it is. Reserve enhancement program is part of continuous.
Great. All right. Well, thank you so much for your time.
It's been a lot of fun. I look forward to getting back with you and talking finance.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Jenny. Have a good day.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of Smoke and Mirrors. If today made you think or see things a little differently, share it with someone who appreciates cutting through the noise. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and leave a review wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for spending part of the day with us. Until next time, keep asking what matters.